I remember the exact moment the world tilted for me. It was my 75th birthday, a milestone I had been quietly looking forward to with both excitement and the kind of trepidation that comes with age. I never imagined that evening would be remembered not for the celebration, but for a revelation that would upend everything I thought I knew about my husband, my family, and myself. Have you ever been in a room where the air feels normal, even cheerful, and yet, at any second, it could crack like glass? That's exactly how it started. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. The dining room was alive with laughter, gentle chatter, and the soft clinking of glasses. My daughters, Grace and Lily, had outdone themselves, arranging flowers with the precision of decorators far younger than their ages. Grace at 50, Lily at 48, both of them trying to make this evening perfect. The table was set with candles and the kind of fine china we never used on ordinary nights. I wore a simple but elegant dress, and I caught myself in the mirror, wondering if I was prepared to feel the years on my shoulders or the sting of surprises yet to come. And then I noticed him. Richard, my husband of 53 years, a man I thought I knew completely, acting nervous. Shifting his weight, rubbing his hands, clearing his throat like he was about to confess something monumental. At first, I laughed to myself. 53 years of marriage, and here he was, fidgeting like a teenager on the verge of being caught sneaking out. But there was a subtle tension, a current under the surface that I had felt but had never named. Small things, mysterious phone calls that he always stepped outside to take, trips that he called business errands but never fully explained. Odd bank statements that made me frown more than once. I had ignored them, filed them away under things to worry about later. But deep down, a tiny voice whispered that something was not right. And tonight, that voice was screaming. I smiled at my daughters as I poured the champagne. Cheers to 75 years of wisdom, I said lightly, masking the storm inside me. I wanted to savor this night, to feel the warmth of friends and family, the comfort of those who had been part of my life for decades. And yet, I couldn't shake the sense that a storm was gathering in the most unsuspecting corner of the room, my husband. Then, as if on cue, he stood. The room quieted instantly, like someone had flicked a switch. Conversations cut off mid-sentence, forks paused midway to mouths, and the candles seemed to burn brighter, highlighting the serious expression on his face. I have something to confess, he said, his voice trembling slightly. I could see the sweat on his brow, the tightness in his jaw. Our daughters froze, their hands clinging to the edges of their chairs. The guests leaned forward, eyes wide with curiosity and growing dread. And me? I smiled. Not the kind of smile that masks ignorance, but the calm, measured smile of someone who has anticipated the moment fully. I won't lie. My heart skipped a beat. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't flinch. I had seen glimmers of this for years. I had observed, speculated, and quietly prepared. The years had given me a subtle, almost uncanny ability to read between the lines. And now, as Richard began to speak, I realized that my patience was about to pay off in ways that neither he nor anyone else in that room could have imagined. He called forward a woman and two grown men. This is my second family, he said, his voice cracking under the weight of decades of lies. I've hidden them for 30 years. The room went silent, the kind of silence that presses on your ears and makes your chest tighten. Grace and Lily gasped, their faces pale, their hands covering mouths that couldn't form words. The guests didn't move, didn't blink. It was as if the entire room had been suspended in a frozen moment, waiting for the floor to drop beneath our feet. I looked at them, the three strangers who were now thrust into our lives, and I felt a surge of clarity. They were real. They existed. And for decades, they had been hidden in plain sight. And yet, in that moment of chaos, of betrayal, of raw, unfiltered shock, I did not panic. I smiled. Calmly. I reached into my purse and pulled out a sealed envelope. I handed it to him. I ran this last year, I said simply. His eyes went wide. His hands began to tremble. And in that instant, I knew the balance of power had shifted. The room, which had been frozen in disbelief, now tilted with tension so sharp it could cut. The question lingering over every head, every soul present, was the same one I had been asking myself for years: how much does someone really know about the person they've spent a lifetime with? And just like that, the scene was set. A calm, smiling woman, a trembling husband, a family in tears, and an envelope that contained the power to rewrite decades of history. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. I remember the moment they stepped forward, as if the air itself had been pulled from the room. Richard's voice had barely finished his confession when the first figure appeared, a woman, elegant but nervous, standing slightly behind him. Her eyes were the kind that had seen hard years but carried a quiet resilience. This was Sarah, 52, the woman he had somehow kept separate from our world for 3 decades. Behind her came 2 men, tall, confident, and unmistakably his sons. Michael, 45, and Daniel, 43. They looked at us with a mixture of hope, fear, and disbelief. It was surreal, like walking into a scene in a movie where the script suddenly changes halfway through. Grace and Lily's reaction was immediate. Their faces went pale. Tears welled up in their eyes before they could speak. "Mom, what, how?" Grace stammered, her hand covering her mouth. Lily's fingers clutched at the tablecloth, her knuckles white. The guests shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances that screamed unspoken questions. And me? I stood perfectly still, calm, watching. Not because I wasn't shocked, but because I had already anticipated something like this. I had felt it for years, the subtle inconsistencies, the stories that didn't quite add up, the fleeting moments of secrecy that I had filed away in a quiet corner of my mind. Richard's explanation tumbled out in fragments. Sarah had been part of his life before I met him, he said, and circumstances had forced them apart. Somehow, over the years, he had managed to keep them hidden, to live a parallel existence without anyone noticing. And yet, there they were, in front of everyone he loved. His words were shaky, broken, full of remorse, and I could see the weight of decades pressing on him. The irony, the sheer audacity of it, wasn't lost on me. I could feel the tension like electricity in the room. On one side, my daughters, hurt and betrayed. On the other, a man who had spent a lifetime hiding pieces of himself from the people who mattered most. And in the middle, me, standing with a sense of clarity that surprised even me. I had always known how to read people, but the depth of his deception was a shock even for someone with a lifetime of observation. Sarah spoke first, her voice steady but trembling. She had no idea about me, about the decades Richard had spent building another life in secrecy. I didn't know, she said, glancing at him. Her sons mirrored her emotion, confusion, hurt, but also a subtle hope that this moment could lead to some sort of resolution. The complexity of human emotions in that room was almost unbearable. I watched every flicker of movement, every micro-expression, the way Richard's hand shook slightly as he held on to the back of a chair. I thought of the things I had noticed over the years, the missed anniversaries, the vague explanations for his absences, the phone calls he had taken outside, the little slips of information that never quite matched. At the time, I had brushed them off as quirks of his busy life. But now, in the glaring light of reality, it all fit together like pieces of a puzzle I had been assembling without even realizing it. Every tiny discrepancy suddenly screamed at me, confirming what I had long suspected. I smiled at him, quietly, almost imperceptibly. Not in mockery, not in anger, but in that calm, measured way someone smiles when they know they are in control of the situation. And then I reached into my purse and pulled out a sealed envelope. My daughters noticed it, of course, they shot me a confused look, and I gave a tiny nod that they didn't fully understand. "I ran this last year," I said, handing it to Richard with a gentle but firm calmness. The room froze. Richard's eyes widened as he took the envelope. His hands trembled slightly as he touched it, unsure whether to open it immediately or keep it sealed. The weight of the gesture was almost physical. He had laid his secrets bare for the first time in front of everyone, but I held a secret of my own, one that could shift the balance of power entirely. I had prepared for this moment, planned for it, and now, quietly, I watched him realize that the game had changed. The daughters were still in shock. Grace's hands were trembling as she looked between her father and me. Lily's eyes were wide, as if she were trying to comprehend not just the revelation of a hidden family, but also the calm, measured response of the woman she had always known as the matriarch of our family. The guests whispered nervously, their curiosity mingling with disbelief. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. It was as if the entire room had collectively held its breath, waiting for the next act in a drama they couldn't have scripted. And in that pause, that moment that seemed suspended in time, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and anticipation. He had believed he could shock us, dominate the narrative, take control through confession. But the envelope in my hand, and now in his, meant that the balance had shifted. He didn't know what I knew, and he certainly didn't know what was waiting for him inside that simple, innocuous envelope. The tension in the room was unbearable. Every eye was on him, every thought swirling around the unknown contents of the envelope, and the unspoken question hovered in the air: what did she know, and how far had she gone to prepare? I gave him nothing more than a smile, letting the suspense stretch just long enough to make every heartbeat in the room echo. And then, as he hesitated, hands trembling, opening the envelope that could destroy or redeem him, I realized the truth: the night had only just begun. The family he had hidden for 30 years was here, but what came next would test all of us, and none of us would walk away unchanged. I watched Richard as his hands trembled over the envelope. He had expected shock, maybe tears, maybe anger, but not this. Not calm. Not the quiet confidence that radiated from me like a shield he had never breached. He looked at me, his eyes wide, searching for some hint, some clue, any sign that I had been blindsided by his confession. But there was nothing. Just a smile, subtle and controlled. The kind of smile that says, "I know more than you think." And in that moment, I realized how much power I had quietly accumulated over the years. You see, I hadn't been blind. Not truly. I had noticed things. Small, almost laughably insignificant details that didn't fit together, whispers of inconsistencies that Richard thought I would overlook. A vacation he said was business, but receipts told a different story. Phone calls at odd hours that he swore were for work. Mysterious deposits and withdrawals I hadn't questioned, until I did. I filed these observations quietly, almost as a habit, almost as a game. And over the decades, I had quietly prepared. I had not confronted him, not publicly, not privately. I waited. Patiently. Strategically. The envelope in his hands contained more than just papers. It contained evidence of a life he had thought hidden, meticulously documented over the past year. Legal counsel, financial audits, statements, timelines, and witness accounts that chronicled every step of the secret he had built. I had done my homework. I had turned suspicion into proof, speculation into undeniable fact. And now, the truth was literally in his hands. Richard's reaction was immediate. His lips parted, then closed. He tried to speak, but the words faltered. His face paled, and a shiver ran through him. You knew," he finally whispered, voice hoarse with disbelief. The room held its collective breath. Grace and Lily's jaws dropped slightly, a mixture of fear, awe, and confusion painted across their faces. The guests looked between him and me, unsure whether to intervene, speak, or flee. "Yes," I said simply, letting the word hang in the air like a blade. I knew. No anger. No hysteria. Just truth delivered with precision. Every glance, every gesture, every silence had been part of a longer plan. I had anticipated this revelation, anticipated his confession, anticipated the chaos. And yet, there was one more layer he hadn't guessed: the consequences. Richard slowly opened the envelope. His hand shook, fingers trembling so much it looked like they might drop the papers entirely. He scanned the contents, and I saw it in his expression: disbelief, fear, and finally, the dawning realization that he had underestimated me. Every hidden account, every trip, every lie meticulously documented and validated. It was as if decades of secrecy had been compressed into these few sheets, exposing him entirely. I watched him closely. The room felt heavier, the tension thick enough to taste. The daughters moved closer, uncertain whether to intervene or simply witness. Sarah and her sons, meanwhile, looked from Richard to me with curiosity and confusion. They had known of his deception in fragments, but they hadn't seen the meticulous preparation, the quiet intelligence that had anticipated their arrival. They hadn't seen me. And then I noticed the micro-expressions, the little flickers of panic and realization that passed over Richard's face. He had assumed his confession would shock me, destabilize me, maybe even break me. But I was unshaken. I had turned his revelation into a stage, and now he was the actor caught unprepared. Every lie he had built, every hidden life, had been rendered impotent by patience, foresight, and strategy. The daughters whispered to each other, wide-eyed. "Mom, what did you?" Grace's voice trailed off. I didn't answer. I let them wonder. Let them feel the same tension, the same uncertainty that Richard was feeling. Lily's gaze flicked between me and her father, realizing that the woman she had always trusted was far more capable, far more prepared, and far more in control than anyone could have imagined. Richard finally looked up, meeting my gaze with desperation. "All this, you planned this?" he said, voice low, almost trembling. And I let a slow, deliberate smile cross my face. "Not planned, anticipated," I said. "I observed, I waited, and I prepared. For decades. You weren't as invisible as you thought." The room was silent. The only sound was the soft rustling of paper as he handled the envelope and the shallow breaths of everyone present. The tension was unbearable, the kind that twists stomachs and makes time stretch uncomfortably. I could feel the shift, the balance of power, once his through deception, was now entirely mine. I had the calm. I had the clarity. I had the knowledge. And then, just as the room seemed poised on a knife's edge, I allowed the smallest crack in my composure, a slight narrowing of the eyes, a tiny, knowing smile, to speak louder than any words. He had no idea what he was facing next, and neither did anyone else. The daughters, the guests, even Sarah and her sons, could feel it. This was far from over. Richard's hands were still trembling, and he looked as if the ground had vanished beneath him. Every breath he took was shallow, uncertain. Every thought must have been racing. And in that instant, I realized something almost beautiful in its cruelty. Decades of lies could be undone in a single moment of revelation, but only if the truth was wielded carefully. And I wielded it now. The envelope had done its work. But what came next, the confrontation, the fallout, the reckoning, was something he could never have prepared for. And as I watched him falter under the weight of his own secrets, I knew that the night was far from over, and that what would happen next would test every one of us in ways we had not yet imagined. But how he would respond, and how our daughters would process this, would unfold in ways even I couldn't fully predict, and the next moments would redefine our family forever. The room was thick with tension, heavier than any air I had ever breathed. Richard was still holding the envelope, its contents having already done their work. The balance of power had shifted irrevocably. But now, the real test began, the confrontation, the fallout, and the unraveling of every relationship built over decades. I could see the fear in his eyes, but I could also see the panic in the eyes of his hidden family. Sarah and her sons hadn't expected this level of exposure, this level of meticulous preparation. And my daughters, Grace and Lily, were caught between anger, confusion, and awe. Grace stepped forward first, her voice shaking, almost breaking. "Dad, how could you do this? How could you hide them from us for 30 years? Her words were sharp, but beneath them was raw pain. Lily's eyes brimmed with tears, but she tried to remain composed. "Mom always knew, didn't she?" she whispered, looking at me with a mix of fear and fascination. I nodded slightly. Yes, I had known. And yes, I had waited. Richard's voice was almost inaudible, choked with shame. I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I was protecting everyone. His explanations, weak and scattered, only deepened the emotional divide. The daughters' reactions were a mixture of disbelief and betrayal. They could not reconcile the father they had loved with the man who had lived a secret life parallel to theirs. I remained calm, watching. Calm had become my ally, my weapon. Every detail I had uncovered over the past year, the secret accounts, the trips, the correspondence, was now evidence of his duplicity. And yet, I didn't act out of revenge. I acted out of clarity, patience, and strategy. The truth had its own power, and tonight it was working perfectly. Sarah stepped forward, hesitant. I didn't know about her, she said, voice trembling. Her sons mirrored her uncertainty, casting nervous glances at Richard and then at me. They had expected confrontation, maybe anger, maybe reconciliation. But they hadn't expected control, precision, and calm determination from the woman at the center of this storm. Richard's panic intensified as he realized the depth of my preparation. The legal documentation, the timelines, the financial audits. All of it was organized, undeniable, and waiting for him to face the consequences. Every lie he had built, every life he had hidden, now collided in front of everyone who mattered. And in that moment, I understood fully that secrets might be safe for decades, but truth, when wielded wisely, could topple entire worlds. The daughters circled him like wolves, but I stayed still, letting them confront him as they needed. Their questions were sharp, cutting through the tension like knives. Why didn't you trust us? Why did you think you could keep this from us forever? How could you live a life of lies while we thought we were your only family? Each question landed, and Richard flinched under the weight of their pain. I finally spoke, quietly but firmly. He thought he could shock us into submission. But truth doesn't need theatrics. It doesn't need fear. It simply is. My words hung in the air, calm and devastating. The room seemed to pause, the chaos suspended as everyone absorbed the magnitude of the revelation. Richard's eyes met mine, desperate now, pleading almost. You prepared for this?" he whispered, voice low, shaking. I allowed a small, deliberate smile to cross my face. "I didn't prepare for revenge," I said. "I prepared for clarity. For control. For the truth to be undeniable." He realized, finally, that his confession had been only the beginning. The real confrontation, the reckoning, was unfolding now, with consequences far beyond what he had imagined. The daughters, still reeling, began to understand my method. Grace's hands unclenched slightly as she looked at me, a mixture of relief and awe in her eyes. Lily's tears fell freely, but her gaze held something new: respect, admiration, recognition of the quiet power I had wielded. Sarah and her sons looked from Richard to me, realizing that their introduction to this family was not simply emotional. It was strategic, orchestrated in a way they hadn't anticipated. Richard's panic reached a peak. Every micro-expression betrayed it: trembling lips, darting eyes, shallow breathing. He had imagined this night ending with shock, maybe regret, maybe tears. He had not imagined the full scope of exposure, the meticulous precision, the complete control of the narrative that I now held. He had thought he was the one revealing truth, but in reality, I had been holding the pen all along. And then I allowed a small shift, a tiny, subtle pause, a narrowing of the eyes, a quiet smile, and the room felt it. The tension shifted from fear to anticipation, and everyone knew that the night's drama was far from over. The daughter's anger, Richard's guilt, Sarah and her son's confusion, all of it was building toward an inevitable climax. Finally, I spoke again, softly, almost casually. "I think this birthday is one we'll never forget." The weight of the statement wasn't in the words themselves but in the authority with which I delivered them. Every eye in the room followed me, trying to discern what I would do next. And in that moment, I realized something profound: decades of secrets, lies, and hidden lives could be unraveled in one evening, but only when truth is wielded with patience, precision, and resolve. Richard remained alone with the envelope for a moment, trembling. He opened it again, rereading what he had feared. And I knew, without a doubt, that what was coming next would test every one of us, challenge every bond, and leave no heart untouched. The fallout was not over. It had only just begun. The room had settled into a heavy silence. The storm had passed, or at least, the first wave had. Richard was still standing there, the envelope in his hands, pale and trembling. Grace and Lily, my daughters, had slowly absorbed the truth, moving between confusion, awe, and a quiet respect they hadn't yet dared to voice. Sarah and her sons lingered cautiously, trying to navigate the emotional wreckage, unsure of where they fit now that the hidden life had collided with our family reality. I looked at everyone, calm and collected, feeling the weight of decades of observation, patience, and quiet preparation finally pay off. There was no dramatic speech, no tears streaming from me, only the satisfaction of knowing that the truth, when wielded carefully and deliberately, can bring clarity in a world built on lies. I had spent a lifetime watching, noting, anticipating. And now, the consequences of Richard's choices were clear for all to see. He tried to speak again, but his words faltered. I didn't mean. I thought. His voice was weak, fractured. The power he had believed he held for decades, the control he thought his secrets gave him, had evaporated in an instant. I stepped closer to him, still calm, still in control. You thought you could hide your life, Richard, I said quietly, but secrets have a way of coming to light. And when they do, they must be faced. The daughters began to understand the scope of what had happened. Grace's anger softened into a kind of hesitant respect. Mom, you really had everything under control, she whispered, still in awe. Lily's tears had dried, replaced by a quiet admiration. You knew, didn't you? All along? I nodded. Yes. I had known. And yes, I had been ready. That preparation wasn't born from malice, but from wisdom, patience, and the understanding that truth is the ultimate power. Sarah, the woman he had hidden for 30 years, looked at me cautiously. I didn't know I never, her voice faltered. Her sons mirrored her uncertainty. They had expected confrontation, maybe anger, maybe resentment, but not this, calm, precise, deliberate, a woman fully in control of her life and her family. They realized, slowly, that the woman standing before them was not just Eleanor Thompson, the matriarch. They were seeing someone who had quietly orchestrated justice in a world of lies, someone who had been several steps ahead of them all along. Richard's guilt was palpable. He shuffled, trying to find a foothold in a reality he had not prepared for. Every glance he gave me, every micro-expression he displayed, told the story of a man realizing that control had shifted irreversibly. For decades, he had hidden, maneuvered, and manipulated. Tonight, he was exposed, not just in front of me, but in front of the daughters he had betrayed, the hidden family he had kept secret, and the guests who had come to celebrate a birthday, only to witness a revelation that would be remembered for decades. And then, quietly, almost imperceptibly, I allowed a hint of a smile to cross my face. The calm, composed exterior I had maintained was deliberate, but beneath it was satisfaction. Not revenge, not malice, but the quiet, unshakable knowledge that truth, patience, and preparation had delivered justice in its purest form. I had shown everyone, without speaking loudly or acting impulsively, that wisdom and observation are far more powerful than deception. I thought of the years, the decades, the subtle hints I had noticed and filed away, the secret trips, the late-night phone calls, the inconsistencies in his stories. Every clue, every anomaly had been a piece of a puzzle I had completed without his knowledge. And now, the puzzle was revealed, and the image it formed was clear. He had been outmaneuvered by the woman he believed he could deceive. Grace and Lily came to me later, their voices quiet but full of newfound respect. Mom, you handled it perfectly. I don't think we could have done what you did, Grace said, her tone trembling with emotion. Lily added, "You didn't panic. You didn't scream. You were in control the whole time." And I realized that in that moment, my daughters had learned something valuable: strength isn't always loud. Power isn't always aggressive. Sometimes, the greatest victories are those achieved with patience, clarity, and quiet strategy. Richard, finally, slumped into a chair, the weight of decades of lies pressing on him in a way that he could no longer escape. He understood now that the secrets he had so carefully guarded were no longer his to control. And I allowed him that realization fully, because sometimes, the most profound lessons come not from punishment, but from facing the consequences of one's own actions. As for the hidden family, Sarah and her sons, they slowly began to understand the dynamics at play. They realized that I had orchestrated the timing, the delivery, and the exposure with careful precision. They hadn't met me before tonight as the strategist, the observer, the quietly unstoppable force who had anticipated everything. And now, they would carry that understanding forward, knowing that the woman at the center of their introduction to this family was not one to be underestimated. Finally, I looked around the room, taking in the faces, the silence, the tension now tempered with understanding. The night had been transformative. It had revealed truths, shifted power, and forced every individual to confront the reality of decades-long deception. And in that moment, I felt a quiet satisfaction, a deep awareness that while the evening had begun with shock, it would end with clarity, reflection, and the enduring knowledge that patience, wisdom, and preparation are more powerful than any lie. I turned to the camera, to the audience, as if to share the final lesson: sometimes, life's most profound victories are quiet. Sometimes, the most powerful people are the ones who wait, observe, and act with calm precision. And sometimes, the greatest peace comes not from anger, revenge, or confrontation, but from knowing you were ready for the truth, whatever it might bring. The envelope had done its work. The hidden family had been revealed. The lies had been exposed. And though the night would continue, the most important truth had already been delivered. I had anticipated the impossible, and in doing so, I had claimed the clarity and control that decades of deception could never steal. And as the candles flickered softly on the dining table, I whispered to myself, almost like a mantra, sometimes, the greatest power is patience, the greatest revenge is preparation, and the greatest peace is knowing you are ready.